value.
Yeah, okay. And what happens to people who engage in theft, but it doesn't reach those conditions? For example, they steal something smaller than that.
So then it comes to ta'zir, isn't it? Discretionary punishment. So discretionary punishment is a wide topic. The scholars differed over some aspects of it, like is it allowed for there to be a financial punishment? The jumhur of the ulama, the jamahir from the former dhahib, they said it's not allowed to be financial. They said that financial punishments are not part of ta'zir. But some of the scholars like Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala and others, they allowed financial discretionary punishments like a fine, or from the discretionary punishments is imprisonment. From the discretionary punishments, and by the way, imprisonment in the time of the Prophet says, you know, it used to be in the masjid, right?
Really?
They used to imprison someone, and that was one of the options they had available to them, to tie them to a pillar in the masjid.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way of bringing a person back to the
and giving a da'wah
back to the deen.
Yeah.
And also the likes of lashes, but less than. And many of the scholars, they put a limit. They said it can't reach the had. It can't reach the same as a had, like 50 or 100. It has to be it has to be a number that is less than that. Okay. Some of them put this condition. So a discretionary punishment, the judge has to look at the situation and what is needed to bring about deterrence, rehabilitation, retribution, incapacitation, and so on, in context of what happened. So that's why you have this discretionary level, which, again, the scholars differed. Is that discretionary punishment allowed to reach such a severe level as a had? Or must it be within smaller punishments?
Okay.
That's a matter which the scholars differed over. And some of them allowed severe discretionary punishments, and some of them, they only allowed discretionary punishments in those things which are not, which have not reached, we're not as severe as what we've been talking about.
Okay, well, you've talked a lot about deterrence. We've talked about retribution, rehabilitation. So we've covered 2 punishments so far: stoning to death, rehabilitation in the dunya, non-existent.
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
Capital punishment, there is no rehabilitation in the dunya. But we did establish, by the way, when we said this in the beginning, that rehabilitation is not a universal objective of sentencing. It's present in some things and not others. That's why you have whole life tariffs in jail. There's no we're not looking to rehabilitate this person at all. However, rehabilitation in Islam is wider than just, how do you bring a person back to righteousness, right?
Yeah.
How do you bring a person back to being an upstanding member of society? That's iman. That rehabilitation is rehabilitation.
And that's when you look at the Sharia as a wide, comprehensive
which is
thing.
imaniyya. It's not, at the end of the day, giving them a job and, teaching them that you don't have to steal from people and you can actually do X, Y, Z. That's a very small part of rehabilitation. And what a greater part of rehabilitation is actually iman. And if Allah Azza wa Jal forgives a person by punishments being carried out, then that is a huge rehabilitation in terms of their iman. There are some things for which we do not want to rehabilitate people. And that's, clear in Islam.
Yeah.
For example, the person who took someone else's life. We're not looking to bring that person back into society as an upstanding member of society. If you made that decision to do that and you fulfilled the conditions of that, then ultimately you have to lose your own life in return for that. And that is where the retribution takes precedence, because they say retribution always exists in sentencing, as opposed to rehabilitation, which is a secondary factor of sentencing, not a primary factor, according to, because we're talking about this from the angle of the non-Muslims who have issues with Islam. Yeah. So in their own system, rehabilitation is a secondary level consideration. It's not primary level. It's not always there in every situation.
Yeah. And that's often the criticism of their own system. When they talk about rehabilitation, a lot of people say that actually, if you've got a criminal record, to come out, it's impossible to find a job. And a lot of these people then turn back to crime. Aren't you doing the same thing with chopping someone's hand off? They're going to come back and everyone's going to know you can't trust this guy.
But one of the most beautiful things is you talked about a criminal record. So let's talk about a criminal record in Islam, right? The criminal record in Islam is what the angel on your left-hand side writes down, yeah?
Yeah.
That's your criminal record in Islam. For that to be wiped out, people in the society recognize that this is a person who has been rehabilitated. The Prophet forbade them to be cursed, forbade them to be mistreated, because this is a person who Allah has rehabilitated them.
Wow.
Allah has brought this person from the point of view of their iman, from the point of view of their practicing. And yes, it is a huge stigma for a person, but there has to be that deterrence. Because if it isn't there, that person is going to walk out tomorrow and they're going to see something someone has and covet it and think, I could go for that just one time. But that is a constant reminder. And ultimately, there has to be a balance. And that's why if you only look at rehabilitation as a sole goal of legislation, you actually find that you'll never find a balance. There has to be a balance. There has to be times where we say, no, retribution here is more important than rehabilitation, but we provide a means for rehabilitation. I think Islam provides the greatest means because it provides a means that relates to the person's iman rather than to the person's job prospects or whatever. That is something which is a rizq is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's something which is, there's no reason why the Muslim treasury doesn't support a person in that regard, because the person is considered to be clean, they've been purified. But it has to be, we have to take all of those things into account. And I would argue that no human being is actually able to get that balance right. There is no human being is able to balance between the different needs of sentencing. Instead, that has to come from Al-Alim al-Hakim, from the one who knows everything and has infinite wisdom and the best judgment. He's the only one who can find the balance which is truly appropriate for the society. Otherwise, we keep trying to find it. And, on one side, we're shedding tears over hardened criminals. And on the other side, we're just, imprisoning people who are turning into criminals. And then we've got people who've committed crimes that, wallahi, they are like, you couldn't find a punishment suitable for it. And it's all just
So then why did Islam leave the door open to ta'zir, discretionary punishment, up to a human being, the qadi, the judge?
Yeah, I think because in discretionary punishments, here the matter is lighter because it hasn't reached a level of the most severe level of the crime. It hasn't reached that level. And so the discretionary punishment that is available to the judge has guidelines now. Because the purpose here is now achievable within the framework of the law sent down by Allah. Now, it's not that the judge doesn't just sit there and pick a punishment like, what have we got today? We haven't lashed anyone for a few hours.
Right.
All right, yeah, go on, let's lash them. It's not like that. The judge has a framework and guidelines in which to act. But at the end of the day, they are looking at these things. They are looking at how do we deter people from doing it? How do we rehabilitate this person? Because this discretionary punishment typically, not always, but typically there is rehabilitation after it. Typically, there are some cases that scholars differed about whether a person can be killed in discretionary punishment or not, and so on. And the judge has more, it's something which hasn't reached that high level of severity or commonality that's so common and so normal in society, like these things which Allah Azza wa Jalla has given us prescribed and specific punishments for. Allah doesn't burden a person with what they can't bear. So it must be within the ability of the judge to give out these discretionary punishments under the concept of ijtihad and so on.